Stand Kneel, Now What, Season 3, Episode 16, interview with Cheryl C.D. Hughes about Venerable Fulton Sheen. Hi, my name is Karen. I like to say that I'm the good kind of Karen. I am first and foremost a daughter of God, a wife, mom of two, and I recently came home to the Catholic Church. I love my faith so deeply that I want others to love it too. Whether you are a cradle Catholic, Catholic curious, or you have come home to the Catholic Church as an adult like I have, Stand, Kneel, Now What is the show for you. Through my love and lots of blunders, my goal is to help you along your faith journey. Our paths may be different, but all of our roads need to lead home so that we can be with our Father. All right, welcome listeners to Stand, Kneel, Now What? I'm your host, Karen Estep, and today we have author Cheryl Hughes on to talk about her book through Ignatius Press called Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen, Convert Maker. And I'm really excited because we're both converts, right?
Right.
Yes. And so that's kind of the point of the podcast, is to just share our conversion stories. And I have read the book and it's beautiful. I've learned a lot about some old actresses and I had to look them up. I'm not going to lie. But we're going to get started with a quick prayer. And then I've got a list of questions for Miss Cheryl. And then we will learn more about Venerable Fulton J. Sheen. Do I have to put the Archbishop in there is it Venerable Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen?
I think it'd be either or.
Okay, perfect. Because I always get, and the listeners know this, I always confuse if it's Pope Saint or Saint Pope John Paul II.
I think state is first in that category. I would.
Okay, that's what I'm like. So I just want to make sure I get all my titles correct. All right, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Lord, thank you for the Catholic Church and for bringing people closer to you through it. And thank you for venerable people like Fulton J. Sheen to guide us on our way, that we can become closer to you through his example. Thank you for authors that take the time to show us more about these great soon-to-be saints and saints that are already saints in heaven. And Lord, just we ask for Venerable Fulton J. Sheen to pray for us as we continue on this interview. Thank you so much, Lord, and thank you for keeping us blessed. And amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
Well, thank you. I try. I'm normally we do like a very particular Catholic prayer, because open prayers sometimes they're beautiful and wonderful, but Catholics tend to have, like, scripted prayers.
Right. Right.
All right. So why did you choose to write a whole beautiful book on Venerable Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen?
Well, that's always sort of a good question. It's something I backed into. I was actually looking to write a biography. I've written my first book was a biography of St. Catherine Drexel.
Okay.
And so I was looking to write another biography, and I had done most of my graduate work when I had to do papers and that sort of thing on women.
Yeah.
Uh, at least through my history master's degree. So I was writing on women all the time. And so I thought Clare Boothe Luce was a really fascinating woman.
Mhm.
Though she's probably one you also had to look up.
Yes,
But
she is.
but it says a lot that after Eleanor Roosevelt, she was the most respected and well-known American woman.
Mhm.
Uh, and Eleanor was pretty far up there for, for years.
Yeah.
Well, when I got into looking at that, Sylvia Jakes Morris had just written a double volume biography of Clare Boothe Luce. And she mentioned in there that she had converted to Catholicism with Fulton J. Sheen.
Okay.
So I didn't need to write anything about her because that's all beautifully taken care of. But I got fascinated by Sheen and the idea of his converts. And
Mhm.
so the more I looked into Sheen, the more I realized, I mean, this is a treasure trove of information and blessings and full exposition of grace spread around wherever he was. Um, I I really enjoyed him. He was really just fascinating. It was something I look forward to every morning, coming down and writing on it, because there'd be some new wonderful story to write, or some little tidbit that was there. Um,
Yeah.
so Sheen is a fascinating person, and I'm happy that more people will get to know who he is if they read the book.
Yeah. And so don't tell us too much because I do want people to go out and buy the book. But what made Sheen so popular? And you mentioned, his the television shows that he was a part of, but can you describe what that is to our listeners that may not know like how he gained so much popularity even among Hollywood elites?
He was originally came to the national and some international fame because of um, the Catholic Hour, which was a radio program that
Oh,
he spoke on for 20 years. And one of the interesting things about Sheen, maybe not so interesting, I think was extremely clever of him. And he carried this out on um, Life is Worth Living on his television program.
mhm.
He almost always begins with a joke, with himself as the butt of the joke.
Oh.
And one of the funny things about it is that it's not a funny joke. But
Oh.
when you tell those kinds of corny jokes, you know it's not funny, and the audience knows it's not funny. But because you say it, then the audience applauds.
Yeah, yeah.
So, it's a way of kind of setting the tone for the talk that he's going to give, and it's also a way of setting his expertise.
Mhm.
I joke, you laugh.
Yeah.
So, and in one of there are several books on conversions, but he wrote a chapter in one of them, as you could imagine, probably in several of them, but two that I knew of and wrote about. He said what you need for converts is kindness, kindness, kindness.
Yeah.
And also, if you started into the book already, you know that his debate coach in college told him to be natural.
Hmm.
So he was naturally kind
Yeah.
and communicated that to people, that he really cared about them. He really was willing to spend time with him. And you'll see that examples of that in the book. Complete strangers, he'll just stay with them for days on end to help them out.
Yeah.
So he, I think, comes across, especially in the television program. It's the 1950s, so television is not all that sophisticated.
Hmm.
So as we look at those YouTubes now of his programs, I'm not sure we would be blown away by them, because I just think we expect so much more slickness to it, and it wasn't slick.
Yeah.
He was just a guy in a cassock with a big cape on, you know, uh, and people felt like he was coming into their living rooms at night. And that's how natural he was to them.
Yeah.
Even though some of the gestures are kind of operatic,
Hmm.
uh, but I think he got that from watching opera.
Yeah. Yeah. He goes, you mentioned in the book, I mean, when you're giving a short biography of him, that he goes to the opera a lot in Europe.
Yeah, he did. So, he incorporated that. I mean, he would throw his arms wide when he was making a point, or, kind of by way of reaching out, physically kind of reaching out to that audience.
Yeah.
Um, and he talked also about what they needed to know about. They were um, very everyday sorts of issues. What to do
Hmm.
about teenagers, what to do about um, good and evil. You
Hmm.
um, what about people who say they're nice and they're not really nice at all?
Yeah.
The
Yeah. Like all
hypocrisy.
the stuff we still need.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So he was very engaging, I think, in that way for people. Um, and also, he was on every medium, if you would think about it. He was on television, he was on radio, he was in the newspapers, he wrote columns, weekly columns. for newspapers, one for a Catholic newspaper, one for sort of a general, you know, AP kind of thing that would be picked up wherever.
Yeah.
And so they read about him. They read
Mhm.
about him. And he also sorts of, he'll say something like, well, the other day when I was shopping, it lets you know that he shops.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So he's relatable.
He's
Yeah,
very
I
relatable.
think I was surprised when he would talk about Europe and the things he would do in Europe. I for some reason, I guess part of it is being a convert. I never think of priests as like being normal and liking normal things. And so I've heard several priests like talk about, going to the movies or, doing, I don't know, the priest at my school does normal stuff, like
Yeah.
shops or smokes cigars or he hangs out with the guys and they watch football. And I don't know, I just always thought, he's a priest. He's probably out doing priest things all the time.
Well, I will say I think he is on all the time.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
he's a workaholic. He really
Yeah.
did work 19-hour days fairly regularly. And he must have had a nearly photographic memory.
Yeah. He
So,
seemed very, very intelligent from an early age. He's like part of the biography that I just remember is how quickly he got through school and
uh,
wanted to soak up all of that. And then he went to Catholic school for a while too, right? When he was younger.
yes, he went to K through 8, actually K through 12 to a Catholic school, and
Okay.
then went to Catholic college,
Mhm.
St. Viator, and then went to seminary.
Okay. Yeah.
But, his awards, if you will, academic awards from Europe, it's hard for us to understand, but he
Yeah.
he he won something, a prize, and what's called an aggregate for a graduate student. It's a higher level degree than a PhD.
Okay.
And if you got it, you could be aggregated to the Louvain faculty. So they would hire you immediately as like a full professor.
Yeah.
That is like the sweetest thing. He was the first American to win that, and I have no idea. He may have been the only American to win that.
Yeah.
And then he was awarded a prize for his dissertation, um, called the Cardinal Mercier Award, and that's only offered once every 10 years. So I mean,
Yeah.
he scooped him up, but
Yeah.
his bishop told him to come home, and he sent him to a small inner city parish where hardly anybody even spoke English. They were extremely poor.
Yeah.
The parish was dying on the vine, and he set it on fire again.
Yeah.
He
That's
visited everybody in the neighborhood. He visited even the non-Catholics in the neighborhood. He gave fabulous sermons, so the pews started, building up and building up and building up. And, after 8 months of that, the bishop said, "Okay, well, now you can go teach at Catholic University of America. You've been a good boy. You can go
yeah.
now."
Yeah. 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 What is something that was surprising that you learned about Fulton Sheen? So the thing that I kind of knew but didn't until you described it in more detail was that he had a lot of pride in his looks. And then when he visited the lepers colony in Asia, somewhere in Asia,
More than one, some in Africa and some in Asia. Yes.
yeah, that he had to really it was a struggle for him. He had to really work himself up to be touched by them and I think that just goes to show you that priests are human. Even if they're archbishops, they're very human and they still struggle with things. And I kind of like to look good too. And so I really related to the fact that, maybe a servant heart, it requires you to tear that down a bit. And so it was kind of refreshing to read that excerpt about the lepers colony. So what
Yeah.
else was really surprising that you learned about Fulton?
Well, the first thing that grabbed me that I learned about was that he was only 5'7".
Yeah, that was, and he was very petite too, not only like height wise, but also he only weighed 125 pounds.
125, 130,
Yeah,
he hardly ever ate, but he exercised a lot. I mean, I wouldn't say he was anorexic. He just didn't eat much and
yeah,
didn't like a lot of things. But when I tell audiences that, they're all just amazed because his influence is so much greater than his stature, if you
Yeah.
will. And the stature is enhanced by what he wore. You
Hmm.
know, the ferriola, the great big cape, makes him
Yeah.
look bigger, makes him look bigger. The buttons down his cassock, form a vertical line that makes, elongates,
Yeah.
and then the camera would be set just a little bit below his eye level, so we're looking up at him.
Oh,
Not
interesting.
not
Yeah.
not extremely up, but we're still nonetheless looking up.
Yeah.
So he has, you know, he comes across as a much bigger person, and partially it's his personality and what he wears, um, but kind of some of it's camera tricks.
Hmm. Hmm.
And he said, we are God's representatives. I mean, we should not be sloppy
Yeah.
slobs.
Yeah. And I like that too, because that was something that, coming from a Methodist church where it's a lot of very much, come as you are and just we want you to show up. It was kind of a discernment process for me to recognize that we are coming before the king and we need to look like that. So that was interesting to read about that, he really liked to present himself well and take care of himself.
Yes, he really did, and we're all the better for it.
Yeah, yeah.
Lived a nice
Okay.
long life.
My next question for you is who was your favorite convert of his to research about? And I'll tell you mine
Okay.
first was Ada Bricktop Smith, just because I think she had such an, and I had to look her up,
Of course.
but her whole life and just the fact that she probably had a life that you wouldn't think about being a convert. And then the fact that she would go to Sheen so often to ask for money, but then she repaid him. I don't know why, out of all the converts I read about in your book, I was like, I kind of love this gal.
I love her so much. I'm thinking about her as my next book project.
Oh, yes. And we'll have you back on for that one.
I'm not sure if I'll get that far, but I think it would be fascinating to do.
Yeah.
Yes, Claire Booth Luce, and she was the person I was going to do originally. Her story is just fascinating to me. She is a woman of loose morals,
Hmm.
but it's something she learned at her mother's knee.
Yeah.
Terrible, terrible to say, but she was also brilliant. She
Hmm.
was what I would consider a sort of a modern Renaissance woman,
Hmm.
in that she wrote plays, she wrote novels, she wrote screenplays. A couple of her books were made into films that were popular. The Women
Yes.
was very popular at the time, and it was done again by more current actresses.
Yeah.
But she was totally alone at one point, and she was ready to jump out the window of a multi-story building where she was staying at a hotel there. She was in such low spirits,
Hmm.
and she had been communicating on and off with a priest from Ohio. She was a congresswoman at the time, and then
Hmm.
she ultimately becomes an ambassador, but she was a congresswoman at the time. And this priest had sent her letters. And he didn't ask for money or anything. He just would send these letters, maybe with some advice or, think about this or think about that. And so she called him at 2 in the morning. She had had two or three to four friends who had jumped out of windows. So
Yeah.
this was sort of the socialite thing to do. But anyway, she called this priest at 2 in the morning, and she apologized for the late hour. And he said, "Don't apologize. This is the call we have all been praying for."
Wow.
Somehow he knew that as an intellectual person, she needed a really intellectual
Yeah.
converter.
Yeah.
Mentor into the church. And so he arranged for Sheen to call her up, and Sheen invited her to dinner. She had lost her daughter. That was the main, I
Mm.
mean, her mother had died, her brother had died, the kind of father figure that who had been with her mother, that person had died, and her daughter had died in a horrific car accident.
Mm.
And she was devastated. So she had nobody, absolutely nobody. And Sheen invites her over and said, well, I will talk for 5 minutes and you can ask questions or talk for as long as you want after that. And so he starts into his 5 minutes, and somewhere pretty early on, he says something about the goodness of God. And I envision her jumping up and knocking her chair over and screaming, what do you mean,
Yeah.
goodness of God? How could he take my daughter? How could he do this? How could he do that? And he finally says to her, and I think this is shocking, I was distressed by it, almost cry when I tell it, is that he eventually says to her, your daughter's death was the price paid for your redemption.
Yeah.
And instead of screaming, running and screaming out the door, never going back, she embraced it
Hmm.
and became a very good Catholic.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember reading that part and having to put the book aside for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrible.
Yeah.
And yet it's so glorious that it worked out the way it did.
Yeah. A friend of mine has recently said that this is God's will, and how will God use it for good? And that goes along with that. So,
Right.
um, yeah, I love that. And yes, I would love to learn more about the converts themselves in this book and where they went after, they had Sheen. A lot of the converts, I was surprised, stayed in contact with Sheen even after they came home to the church.
Well, he made friends and he made friends for life.
Hmm.
Um, when he was I think it was in Paris, when he was a very young priest, he came across a little girl who was standing on a street corner and she wanted to cross the street. And so I think she just took his hand and walked across the street with
Ah,
him. And he invited him, she, the little girl, she was about 6 or 7, invited Sheen to come to tea the next day at her,
uh-huh.
with her family. And he showed up. Well, one of the last letters he was writing as he lay dying was to this little girl. They had stayed in contact all this time, 60 plus some years. And
Yeah.
she showered him with gifts and favors. And I mean, he just stayed friends with people. He really liked people. And that came across in his interactions. I never found anybody that just hated him, except
Yeah.
some Protestant ministers who did not like him because he was stealing their sheep.
Yeah. 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 That's beautiful. So I often see quotes from him, or even you mentioned, YouTube video that's being replayed on him. And it seems like he even knew what we needed at our time right now, especially um, I'm a high school teacher and I'm also a mom. And sometimes I read his quotes and I'm like, how did he know? Like, how did he know that we would be in this situation even after he passed? So, what do you think is something that he would say to Christians today? His quotes are really popular, especially among Catholic circles too. They're really popular. But what do you think he would want us as Christians to know today?
Well, I think he would want you to know that God is still in charge and that we shouldn't give up just because everything in society looks like it's opposed to us.
Mhm.
Um, he firmly believed that there would be a turnaround at some point, and I think he's taking the long view. So just because it hasn't happened between his death and our talk this morning or this afternoon,
Mhm.
uh, we still have to keep at that. And I think to evangelize, he was very much open. If you sat next to him on an airplane, he probably would give you a rosary and have you reciting it and have you converted by the end of the flight. I mean, he just struck up conversations with total strangers, and
Yeah.
it's like we were saying earlier that he really cared about them. He was really very nice, and he
Yeah.
wasn't threatening in any way.
Yeah. So do you know when he will be officially canonized? I don't know how all of that works.
I wish I could know that answer. I do not know that answer. I've spoken with a couple of bishops, and what they have told me, Karen, um, is that Rome is really quite neutral on who gets to become a saint.
Yeah.
I mean, unless it's one that the Pope really wants. And so, he got right up to his beatification because he has a solid miracle behind him, a baby that was stillborn who came to life after more than 60 minutes.
Oh, I didn't
Uh,
know that. Oh, wow.
That's his miracle. And it's been authenticated and everything. But he got right up to that, and somebody from the Diocese of Rochester, New York, where he had been the ordinary, really an unhappy ordinary for 3 years. It just wasn't his strength to run a parish. I mean, to run a diocese. It stopped there, and
Hmm.
it's not been picked up again. And so I look at it as something that needs to get, the deck needs to get reshuffled, that he's on the top, because
Yeah.
in that time, it's been actually several years now, that many dioceses around the United States are putting forth candidates for canonization.
Yeah.
Many, many, many. And so the field is really crowded. And what it takes is for the USCCB to
Hmm.
get together behind Sheen and let Rome know we want this guy canonized.
Yeah.
And until that happens, it probably won't happen. I mean, I hope it will happen in my lifetime,
Yeah.
uh, but I'm coming to the end, so not anytime soon or anything. But
Yeah. Yeah, no, I hope there's a lot more books in you. Uh, and well, and one of the beautiful things, and I wish, I know it's miracles that we can't see all the time, is that he is still a convert maker, and there are still people, I see him posted a lot. I'm in several of the Ascension Presents Facebook groups, and there's several of Fulton Sheen's quotes, and so, and there's not, only Catholics in those Facebook groups. So, even as a Catholic teacher and a Catholic mom, we don't know, we can't always see the conversion that we're trying to cause, or even this podcast. I hope it causes people to pause and think and come home to the Catholic Church. So, hopefully, I'm going to be praying for that he gets canonized pretty soon, because it's a beautiful story, and I love that your book really touches upon his humanity. And, even though he was this famous priest, for lack of a better word, he still was humble and kind. And he still struggled with things throughout his faith, and um, still even struggled with the sin of pride and having to break that wall down to reach more people. So it's a beautiful book. Thank you so much for taking the time to write it, and introduce him to other converts.
well, I thought if I were rich, I would buy a book for every bishop in the United States.
Oh,
Get them a letter saying, okay, now it's
yeah.
time for Fulton J. Sheen, please.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe we can just write letters.
Well, that we could do.
All right. If you're ready, we can play this game that I play. I know.
Okay.
So I'll give you kind of the backstory, which I give all of my guests on here. So I used to teach English as a second language. And
Mhm.
so Odd One Out is a fun game because it's a picture game, really, where students can pick one of the pictures that they think is the odd one out. And one of my favorite examples to give is I put a picture of a flamingo, a chicken, and a penguin up as the examples. And knowing myself, I would have picked the flamingo every day because it's the only one that can fly for a sustained amount of time, because chickens don't fly very far and penguins can't fly at all. I thought all of the kids would pick flamingo. That is not what one of my students said. She picked the chicken because it's the only one that you can eat. And so, which is the case, because we went down this rabbit hole of like finding out the legalities of if you can, if you can eat a flamingo and you can eat a penguin, which you can't. Just FYI, if you ever
Oh,
want.
I'm glad you've told me that
Yeah,
now.
I know. I don't want you to be arrested for, picking up penguins and eating them.
No.
No penguin nuggets tonight. That's off the menu. So I picked three places that I know that Venerable Fulton J. Sheen lived, and you just have to pick which one you think is the odd one out. I think there's an obvious one, at least for me, but we'll see if we match up. Okay, so your first choice is New York. Illinois, where he was born, or Minnesota, where he went to seminary? Which one do you think is the odd one out?
Oh, dear. I think Minnesota, because I don't see him having much to do with Minnesota
Once he left, yeah.
once he leaves the seminary. It prepared him well for what he was going to do in life, but it wasn't a place that he visited so frequently. And of course,
Yeah.
he lived most of his later years, from like 50 on in New York. He left, he did leave Peoria pretty early, so maybe I should have said New York was the place because that's where he lived the longest. But
Yeah.
I'll stick with Minnesota.
Okay. I would have said New York only because now, and this is debatable as well. Illinois and Minnesota are technically, I guess, considered the Midwest. So I am from Missouri, and I think of Minnesota as north.
Yes, me
I
too.
would consider Illinois part of the Midwest, but Minnesota to me is too far north. Like once you get past Iowa, it's no longer the Midwest. But people from Minnesota will argue with me and say that that is part of the Midwest.
Right, right. Well, I live in Oklahoma and I wonder if that really is the Midwest too, because
We have that conversation as a family sometimes. That's
so
one of our favorite things not one of our favorites, but one thing that comes up frequently is like, do you count Arkansas? Do you count Oklahoma? Where did they fall in the United States? So,
right.
yeah.
I think if you were on the Buffalo Trail, you were in the Midwest.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Well, thank you so much. I will link your book in the show notes. And then are you on any social media that my followers should know about?
I'm sorry, I'm not. It's just one less thing for me to do. I'd
I appreciate
rather
that. I
write
wish I
another,
wasn't.
rather write another book than be on social media.
Yeah, no, I love that. So we will at least link the book. Thank you so, so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And then if you do write any more books about his wonderful converts, we would love to have you back if you're up for it.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Yes, thank you so much. And listeners, we will see you next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.